we will get on to the relationship between Elizabeth and Dudley. And like I say, please feel free to put into the comments anything you're thinking about it, anything that I say that sparks a thought off. You might disagree with me. It's a lot of conjecture. Can you imagine if we were talking about some people who were alive now that we didn't really know or meet, but had an interest in, and we're discussing their relationship and exactly what's going on in there? We'd probably disagree. We're talking about people who lived 500 years ago. So let's discuss. So they were born about a year apart. Robert Dudley's birthday isn't known for certain. He was the fifth son of John Dudley and his wife, whose name has escaped me. I think it's Anne. And yeah, his birthday isn't known for certain. So again, another one of these shoot the myth that only girls' birthdays don't get recorded. It's a myth. Please don't be taken in by it. Elizabeth's, however, we do know the exact date of her birthday, 7th of September 1533. So she turns what tomorrow? Someone do the math. What birthday would she be having tomorrow? She was born at Greenwich Palace. Of course, her mother was Anne Boleyn and her father Henry VIII. Should have been a boy, apparently. Of course, they should have. In inverted commas, you know, the letters that were already written to send out to announce the birth of the baby had the words prince. It had the word prince, and an extra S had to be added for the letters to go out to say that there was the happy deliverance of a princess with an extra S. So Elizabeth's born 1533. Robert Dudley would have been born the year before, possibly in the June of 1532. So they're very close in age. I am not completely sure when, or I don't know if anyone is, but I'm going to be asking some of my historian friends if we know when Elizabeth and Robert actually first met. So we know that they know each other as children. Heron City says 490, I think. Oh yeah, it'll be a 10. 33, 23. Yes, 490. And I was just there as well. Happy 490th birthday to Elizabeth I tomorrow. So, have to write that in our diary. She's going to be, anyway, obviously it'd be 533. So we know that they already know each other by the time they are both in the Tower of London. Whether they already knew each other much, I have read that Robert was brought up as in the sort of, or would have been maybe in the schoolroom of Elizabeth's younger brother Edward, who would become Edward VI. Edward's born in 1537, so he is he's 5 years younger than Dudley. So I'm not sure how the schooling worked, whether that makes it less likely that they were together, or maybe they were only together for certain things. But that would have exposed Elizabeth to Robert. And then, of course, by the time, when Edward dies, it is Robert's father, who's Duke of Northumberland, who has married Robert's elder brother Guildford Dudley to Lady Jane Grey, now Jane Dudley, and she is the one who is named as Edward VI's successor in Edward VI's own handwriting for his device, what he calls his device for the succession. of course, we know that that doesn't go well. But Robert is actually sent to intercept or to bring Mary, Henry VIII's eldest daughter, his daughter by Catherine of Aragon, who has been, she was named in Henry VIII's will, although not legitimised. Neither had Elizabeth been, but both had been named in the will. But Edward had taken both of them out of the will. He'd said, no, the throne cannot go to either of my sisters. It cannot go to Mary. It cannot go to Elizabeth because their line is illegitimate. So it has to go down the line of my father's youngest sister, Mary. And that is where you get the grey line. Mary, though, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, does not take this as a given. She proclaims herself queen when she hears of Edward VI's death. But around that time, Robert is sent to go and get her, to bring her back to London, recognizing, or the family recognizing that she will need to be kept secure. Of course, she actually manages to raise a lot of support very, very quickly and marches to London. Lady Jane Grey remains in the tower that she was already in because she was preparing for her coronation, but now she is a prisoner. So Robert is incarcerated in the tower as well, along with his brothers and his father. But his father is executed fairly quickly. And then you get the Wyatt Rebellion, which was sparked by Mary's not just Mary's Catholicism, but the fact that she was wanting to marry Philip of Spain, who wasn't quite Philip II by then. Whenever I say she married Philip II of Spain, some pedant will say he wasn't the second by then. His dad was still alive. Yes, but he became Philip II of Spain. That's how you'll know him. That sets off the Wyatt Rebellion, in which Elizabeth is also implicated. So Elizabeth is put in the tower. And so her and Robert are in the tower at the same time. Now, potentially, David Starkey surmises that they maybe spent time together when they were in the tower. Either way, they're beginning to have shared experiences here. Robert, Elizabeth is released, interestingly, on the 19th of May, which is the anniversary of her mother's execution, and sent for house arrest at Woodstock. I think she goes to straight away after that. Robert is freed eventually, and Ambrose, his brother, and they actually become allies with Philip of Spain. But I'm going to give you at the end of this some recommended books if you want to learn more about all of this stuff, especially the Elizabeth and Dudley story, by understanding both of them and everything that's going on at the time. So I actually have a list of homework for you. I've got some recommended reading if you want it at the end. And of course, if you want to be part of a book club where you get to read a book and discuss it, join my Patreon. It's fun. It's £5 a month. So I'll try and keep it the minimum you can. So where have we got to? So they are friendly. Lottie Rose was going to ask for book recommendations. I have them. I will give you them at the end. But I'm not clear, and please let me know if you've read anything that seems to clarify this, exactly when Elizabeth and Robert meet. But they are close in age. They're beginning to have very similar experiences. I mean, to have both experienced being prisoners in the Tower of London, not knowing whether you are going to be executed, is probably quite a niche experience that they can then it would be unthinkable, wouldn't it, for them to have never discussed that, I would have thought. But then we get to November 1558, and Mary, despite getting married, she is getting to an age where you'd think it was not likely she was going to have children. She was 38 when she gets married, especially her first child. She has two what she thinks are pregnancies, possibly uterine cancer, which kills her in the end. And interestingly, the effigy of Mary the First, it's in the Jubilee Galleries at Westminster Abbey, which we may well be seeing actually on the tour next week. It's wooden, it's wood, and it has a belly, as in like a pregnant belly. It looks like a little pregnant belly, which I found quite shocking when I first saw it. Well, it was unexpected. I just didn't expect to see that, even though you read account after account of her thinking she's pregnant and having all sorts of issues, gynecological issues. But yeah, to see this sort of belly, so it potentially cancer, and that would have been possibly the tumor. Owen Arga says it. Yes, Queen Elizabeth I and II both became queen at 25. Is that right? Was she 25? I never actually have looked at that. She's 25 when she became queen or when she was crowned. Just double check for me. So then November 1558, Mary I dies. Now, next week, actually, so my pre-record, the one I've just done, I talk about Elizabeth, the Mary Queen of Scots. This is sort of the time where the rift begins, the seeds of the rift between Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots begins at the death of her sister, because Mary adopts the arms of England in her shield. But that is for next week. Now, Elizabeth becomes queen. She is at Hatfield House, and she is she finds out she's queen. She very quickly, almost immediately, she sets up a council, and Robert Dudley is assigned the role of master of the horse. In that role, that means it's a very intimate role at a court with a female ruler. The master of the horse will be out on hunts with her. He's permitted to touch her, to help her on and off the horse, and he played a major role in organising and in the actual coronation service as well. So he rode directly behind Elizabeth in her coronation procession. So he is clearly already a very close friend. He is, however, already married. So Robert had married Amy Robsart in 1550, the middle of 1550, which to me raises the very interesting question of, could they have married, had he not married Amy Robsart, could they have married before Elizabeth was queen? Because remember, I suppose by this point, anyone would be a bit daft to think the succession is going to go in the most obvious way. But Mary, well, the point where Dudley marries Amy Robsart, Edward's still alive, and he's going to get to his majority, and he's going to, marry and have children. And then Mary marries, and she seems pregnant. But Robert had already married Amy Robsart in 1550, probably a love match, but possibly one that he regretted. Maybe. So married for love, but and she was an heiress as well, but they didn't seem to have a permanent home, which was interesting. Now, when Elizabeth becomes queen, Robert's at court, and Amy still doesn't have really a permanent home. They're sort of staying at acquaintances, friends, family. But from the very beginning, it is public just how close Elizabeth and Robert are. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of attempt to hide this at all. They're seen laughing together. They'll be going off on rides alone. There isn't really much attempt to hide it. And clearly others understand the power of of this relationship. I mean, it's commented on the continent. Mary, Queen of Scots, at one point, in fact, after the death of Robert Dudley's wife, Mary, Queen of Scots, comments that the Queen is looking to marry her horsemaster, and that he's got rid of his first wife to make way. Because Amy Robsart dies in very odd circumstances on the 9th of September. So another anniversary this week, 9th of September, 1560, Amy Robsart dies. She is found at the bottom of a staircase in a house she is staying. And oddly, she had sent all of her servants away. So she was in the house on her own, which is a bit odd for anyone of this status at this time. The theories are all out there. Could it have been Robert? Could it have been suicide? Amy is thought to have potentially had breast cancer. Was she in pain? Was she coming to the end of her life anyway? Was she feeling like a burden? She hadn't seen her husband. He's busy with the Queen all the time. Or could it have been somebody trying to frame Robert, like Cecil, one of Elizabeth's chief advisor, to get Robert out the way because he didn't like the influence Robert was having, but also didn't want to for there to be any chance of her marrying Robert. Which I don't know. I mean, unless it was known that Amy was that ill that she was going to die potentially, and her death could be put to good use as far as Cecil was concerned, that she may as well, her death may as well serve a purpose. And because the one thing that it absolutely did do that we can be certain about is it made any plans for Elizabeth to marry Robert impossible. Which theory do I come down on the side of? I think there's definitely foul play. I don't think it's Robert. I don't think it did him any good. So I don't see the benefit. If somebody was trying to discredit Robert as a potential suitor for Elizabeth, then it worked. It absolutely worked. And Argus says Dudley didn't match Elizabeth's rank. No, but so there's the fact that he would have influence on Elizabeth that would have created enemies. And then there's the fact that if she marries a subject, and she was well aware of this, then she loses any potential foreign alliance which she could make. And she plays that card for actually way past when she's likely to make a marriage that would create heirs. She's still doing it. Estelle goes into this in her book, Blood, Fire and Gold. It's absolutely incredible how long Elizabeth kept up the game of potentially marrying into the French royal family, or them marrying into her, the French royal family marrying into her, into the English court, for political advantage. Either way, it makes a marriage between to an Argus point though as well. He's not of a rank. Um, Now, of course, he is made the Earl of Leicester in 1564, and this is the same time as well. So, because their father had been executed as a traitor, the family's titles and lands basically go back to the crown. So his elder brother Ambrose hadn't inherited the Earl of Warwick title. That was reinstated to him, and Robert was given the title Earl of Leicester. So, but it's that Warwick link which he chose the bear and the ragged staff as his badge. So he's Earl of Leicester, but that's actually Warwick badge. Anyway, so you go. So if you go to Warwick, like we will be on the tour next week, the signposts, the county signs all have the bear and ragged staff on them. So he's made Earl of Leicester. Now this is part of an odd plan to marry Robert to Mary, Queen of Scots. So again, she's not he's not her equivalent either. And Elizabeth seems to have this really odd idea that she backtracks from, that she could send her loyal Robert, her eyes, as she called him, to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, and kind of keep Mary subdued. I don't know, some sort of keep her in check. But he's not very up for this. Mary certainly isn't up for it. She basically says no thank you to your cast-offs. And this is when they decide to send up Darnley instead to see her, which obviously turns out to be a mistake, because she marries him at the drop of a hat, and then he shows his true colours as the womanizing drunk that he was, and he eventually ends up dead, and she's implicated in his murder. But anyway, that's another story. So he's made Earl of Leicester. Now, an area I don't know about, but this is something to look into. Maybe somebody wants to think about this. He's made an Earl. There are 2 levels above Earl, so I don't know how that happens or not. Marquess and Duke, and he's not made either of those. So not only is he's elevated to the Earl of Leicester, but he's not elevated higher. I mean, Elizabeth had this idea that he would marry her and then bring Mary back down to London, and they would live in some sort of menage a trois. Now, it seems unlikely. And anyway, Robert wasn't up for it. Like I say, Mary wasn't up for it, so it didn't happen. Mary ends up marrying Darnley. In 1570, there's a northern uprising. And I mention this just because it's more about Elizabeth's story than Elizabeth and Robert. But I mention it because it's just interesting when we think about, we've talked about Mary the First, Elizabeth's elder sister, who of course had the sobriquet Bloody Mary for her burning of Protestants. Now, she also, of course, ordered executions in the wake of the White Rebellion, which we mentioned. Their father, Henry VIII, after the Pilgrimage of Grace, had also ordered executions. And any of you who've watched the Tudors series will remember I thought it was a very harrowing episode where the king's henchmen effectively are sent to the north to subdue them. It's like a preemptive strike against any further uprisings by hanging people from every village in a show of, you're not going to do this again. So But this is just interesting. After the Northern uprising, so in January 1570, Elizabeth orders that people are hung from every village, in every village that's had any involvement. Between 8 and 900 people are hung. And just for context, that's 4 times as many as her father had hung after the Pilgrimage of Grace. And it's 9 times more than Mary had executed after the Wyatt Rebellion. Right, there's one bit I missed out because 1562. Oh, and yes, so there's another book I'm going to recommend. If there's a very good chapter about this in Gareth Russell's book on the palace, because at Hampton Court Palace in 1562, Elizabeth falls gravely ill, and she's caught smallpox. She is at death's door. She was very nearly lost in 1562. Remember, in 1560, Amy Robsart has died. The influence of Robert on the Queen is already a cause of concern to people who don't like Robert, people who just want their own influence on the Queen to go ahead unhindered. But in 1562, so only 2 years, I don't think it's even quite 2 years after Amy's death, when Elizabeth falls ill with smallpox, she has not named a successor. She refuses to name a successor for the entirety of her life. It's questionable as to whether she ever actually named or gave her assent to James VI of Scotland being her successor. But anyway, she definitely hasn't at this point made any noises as to who will be her successor. But on her deathbed, not on her deathbed, but on her near deathbed, she tells her counsellors that she wants Robert to be created, in the event of her death, to be created Lord Protector with a salary of £20,000 a year. The counsellors agree to her face, but as soon as they're out of the room, are trying to work out what's actually going to happen. And there's probably the bulk of the element to be concerned with here is that that this just isn't viable. This isn't viable for Robert Dudley to become Lord Protector. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. You know, Lady Jane Grey, Queen Jane, named in Edward VI's device for the succession, cannot remain queen for long. And you've still got at this time, of course, Mary, Queen of Scots, with Tudor blood running through her veins, who is actively pursuing, even once she's a prisoner in England, actively pursuing her position in the English succession. So that plays, I think that shows, that plays Elizabeth's cards there. She trusts Robert. Clearly they're in love. Whether that, well, we'll do a bit of a poll at the end, whether that you think they did or they didn't. But clearly they're very close. Clearly she trusts him completely. But it sounds like a thing that it doesn't sound very considered. And Elizabeth, remember, is incredibly ill at this point. When she says that she wants Robert to be Lord Protector of England in the event of her death. But you can see then why people are concerned. So then we get I should say as well, despite Robert not being up for this marriage potential to Mary Queen of Scots, he did favour her claim. He was somebody who, he was trying to encourage Elizabeth to name her successor. He understood that the lack of stability that came with not naming a successor. Now, Elizabeth was always concerned, and indeed she said, and it's pinched from Roman history. One of the Roman emperors, I'm sure, already had said this, but basically that people are more concerned with the rise. Concerned isn't the right word, is it? More taken with the rising than the setting sun. In other words, if she names her successor, she will immediately lose people to them in terms of her being able to actually rule over them. So she never ever does it. And there's a payoff. There's no exact perfect answer to Elizabeth's succession. Not naming an heir leaves it distractingly high on the agenda of the English government. Distractingly high. What else is not getting done because they are discussing for the entirety of her reign who is going to be taking over from her? Melissa over in Cape Cod, hello, welcome. So where did I get to? So Robert is actually keen for her to name a successor. Lottie Rose says she's very smart in not naming a successor. It's let everyone run around for her like ants trying to win favour. Indeed. But what I'm saying is I don't think there was a perfect solution. Her not naming a successor also had downsides, big downsides, because people were trying to work that out anyway. So they were then hedging their bets on potentials. So 1570, we have that Northern Uprising where Elizabeth orders the executions of between 800 and 900 people. And in 1572, there is the St. Bartholomew Day massacre in France. It is not possible for Elizabeth to continue, and actually it hadn't been for a little while, but to try and tread this fine line between managing the religion of the country, between, allowing Catholics to kind of get on with it, the anti-Catholic feeling in her own council grows and grows, especially because you had was it Cecil who was there at the time? Somebody was there at the time. I think it was Cecil. And so they come back, or was it Walsingham? Someone can Google that for me. But anyway, so her close advisors are physically witnesses to this massacre, and are then for the rest of their lives vehemently anti-Catholic. Yeah, so I won't go into that story in any particular detail now, but it's just things are starting to change. Elizabeth is excommunicated by Pope Pius V. There's the St. Bartholomew Day massacre. Anti-Catholic tensions in England are building. Next week, in fact, we're going to Harvington House as part of the tour that we're on next week, which is a brilliant setting for telling the recusant story in Elizabethan England. The lengths that Catholics then had to go to remain practicing their faith was quite extreme. But anyway, with this as a backdrop, Robert is still so the death of Amy Robsart makes it very difficult for Elizabeth and Robert to marry. She died in 1560. 1575, Robert is hosting Elizabeth at Kenilworth Castle, which she was a royal castle she gave him the lease for. And she's visited him there a few times. But this time, ready for this visit, he has built an entire wing for her. It mirrors the 11th century keep, and well, sort of in design, but it gives Elizabeth her own set of apartments while she is at the castle. He also has designed and built I don't know who designed it, but anyway, a garden there for her private use so that she has some time away from people. The clock is stopped when she gets there because time is going to stand still for the Queen's visit. So she's there in July 1575 for 19 days, and there is there's the potential that actually it was supposed to be 21, but something happened and she cut it short. Whether this sustained efforts on Robert's part to persuade eventually Elizabeth to please marry him, whether maybe that was too much, maybe the weather changed, maybe she got bored, I don't know. But it's a 19-day visit. Potentially it should have been slightly longer. That's in 1575. It's Robert's last-ditched attempt, really. Well, publicly. This is all public. So, there is no sort of behind closed doors relationship. It's clear they love each other. It's clear they're close. It's clear that he wants to marry her. Elizabeth is constantly playing the political love match game of trying to keep in with France, for instance, by dangling the carrot of a marriage. So whether or not, well, we can discuss this at the end, whether or not they did it and whether or not she was ever seriously thinking about marrying him. He clearly would have married her. He seriously was thinking about marrying her. But of course, I say of course, you may not know, in 1578, he marries her kinswoman, Letty Snowles, who is described as a sort of younger lookalike of Elizabeth. They marry in secret, and I think it was an ambassador who tells Elizabeth, and she is livid, absolutely livid. And she banishes Lettice from, they banish them both from court, but she has Robert back. But Lettice is, I don't think she ever comes back to court. I've forgotten to say something about Amy Robsart's death, but Elizabeth did banish Robert from court then, and she set up an inquiry, but he was exonerated. But anyway, with this, she's furious that he's married again. He's married in secret. He's married her kinswoman. He's married a lookalike. I mean, it's got to have hurt. 1587, Mary Queen of Scots is finally executed. Now, by this point, with the rising Catholic tensions, with Mary herself becoming involved in escape plans, she's been here for a very long time. She's incarcerated for the best part of 20 years. But Robert goes from initially supporting Mary's claim and sort of, or favouring, should I say, Mary's claim, to actually encouraging Elizabeth that she does have to sign the death warrant for Mary. So in 1587, Mary is executed. This is supposed to, Elizabeth has been sold the idea that this is supposed to bring stability to the realm. This is supposed to take away the Catholic threat. Of course, it has the opposite effect. Catholic Europe is incensed. They didn't do anything to come and get Mary, by the way, beforehand, but neither did her son. But this is a great excuse. And the Spanish Armada comes in 1588. And if you want to read more on that, I have a paid blog on Substack, and it's in my Patreon as well about the Armada maps, which I saw a few weeks ago, and I go into that in a bit more detail about what happened there and link it in with the Tilbury speech which Elizabeth gives, this Tilbury, the very famous one, I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too, and etc., etc., etc. So the Spanish Armada comes the year after Mary Queen of Scots is executed. Robert is heading the troops at Tilbury. He invites the Queen to come and inspect the troops. That is where she gives this famous speech. And I talk about this in the blog because the timings seem to indicate something rather interesting. And actually, I have a video about with her Tilbury speech in it, if you're interested, and also me going to try and find the location that she delivered the speech. So if you want to see that, that is on my YouTube channel. I will, if I remember, and please feel free to prompt me. If I forget, I will put a link to that in my Instagram and Facebook stories as well. But she sees, so she goes and inspects the troops. She has dinner in Dudley's tent. And she goes and this is the last time they see each other. He is already feeling pretty unwell, and he decides, I don't know if he decides or she tells him to go and take the waters at Buxton. Buxton is in the Midlands, so he would have made his way up from Tilbury, potentially stopping off at Kenilworth, his seat at Kenilworth, and making his way up to Buxton. He's staying at an acquaintance's, a friend's house at Cornbury in Oxfordshire when he dies. He's penned a letter to her in the meantime, asking how she is. She seems to be having some ailments, aches and pains, and he's inquiring after her health. She gets the letter, and then, of course, following that, gets the news that he's in fact died on his way to Buxton. And she writes on it his last letter, and she keeps it folded and in a casket by the side of her bed. She goes into deep mourning. She locks herself away for days, and is absolutely bereft and distraught. He's buried at St Mary's Church in Warwick, which unfortunately we won't have time to go and see when we're on tour next week. So we've got a very, very busy day that day. But he's buried with Letty Knowles, his final wife, second or third. Not sure. There was another marriage in the middle potentially. And they are both the end of their lines. Robert Dudley has no living heirs, neither do any from his other brothers. They died childless. He and Lettice had a son, which they'd named Robert, but he had died at the age of 4. He's buried in St Mary's Church. They're all in the Beauchamp Chapel, as is his brother Ambrose Dudley as well. The little boy had predeceased them, so they're all in that chapel. It's an amazing chapel. I put some photos of it on my Instagram, so please feel free to check them out. So there's a couple of questions that I'm interested to know your thoughts on. The first one is, do you think Elizabeth ever seriously entertained the idea of marrying Robert? And do you think that Elizabeth and Robert's relationship was ever physical in the fullest sense? I'm not in History After Dark at the moment, so I still think there's the potential that Elizabeth just ran out of time. And some of you who are a bit younger, Ali, I can tell you, suddenly you feel like you've run out of time for all sorts of things. I mean, she comes to the throne unexpectedly, really. And we kind of see it as a kind of obvious it was going to happen, but it probably wasn't. And that stops all the plans potentially. I mean, like I say, though, Robert was already married, so he'd already been taken, which makes it difficult to actually think, would they have got married? If he had not married Amy Robsart, I don't think we'd ever have had to have the discussion. I think they would have made their move already if they were allowed to, of course. But why would Mary or Edward and then Mary? Well, if it was, would they have been old enough? Yes. If it had been during Edward's reign, when the Dudleys were in favour, then maybe Elizabeth would have been able to marry him. So, like, I'm thinking if Amy, if he hadn't have married Amy, we might have seen them married earlier. In the same way that knowing that getting married would be unwise, in the same vein as that, is getting physical not potentially have been incredibly unwise. Although, as a complete aside to this, but kind of relevant, but I'm not saying it specifically in this case, that would people not have been a bit more inclined to understand cycles, how women got pregnant, how you might not get pregnant? Maybe they didn't, but I don't buy that is automatically the case just because they lived before us, like as if we are the pinnacle of all knowledge and understanding, which we're not, because we're so, in terms of, especially in terms of attachment to nature and understanding sort of how we live in the world and our bodies, I feel like we're more detached than ever, and in a world where there's no distractions and you have to take care of your body because the repercussions of not doing so are so grave, literally sometimes, that would they just know of what to do and what not to do when you're a teenager, you're told, oh, you could get pregnant at a drop of a hat, and then you find out when you do want children that there's like a month where you can actually get pregnant. Would they have known that? Jess says, I'm not sure she would have ever married after what happened to her mother and the example of marriage she grew up with, but it is very sad that she couldn't marry him and be happy. Yes, of course, we haven't talked about the awful experiences she would have seen the women she loves and was close to go through. Amy says, no, I don't think she considered marrying him. I think they did do it though. Oh, okay. Interesting. Sherry, it was the great mystery of Amy's death. SJ, unwise maybe, but the mistake would have been a lot easier to make in the moment. Yeah, yes, I see what you mean. Who thinks of the consequences when it comes to that? Yeah. In Sambarusa, any woman of power will lose certain aspects of that power once they're married. It happens to all women of powers everywhere. So she held on to the power longer by not getting married. And of course, like we've said as well, this the dangling the carrot of foreign alliances lasted clearly, obviously, a lot longer than had she have got married at any point. That would have been the end of that. Yeah, and Arga says that Elizabeth made a vow as a teenager not to marry. Now, teenagers do stuff like that. Teenagers do make big declarations when they're, do you remember being a teenager and being absolutely certain you knew everything? You knew it. So I think, yes, I think it's a little bit too simplistic, in my opinion, just if you think of human nature, to say that something someone said once would never have, their attitude to that would never have potentially ebbed and flowed. And then, yes, of course, in the end, she doesn't marry. So we can link it back to that and go, well, she would never intended to. But is there any, does that actually mean that in the interim, there was no wavering? I don't know. Everyone, we've been on a long time today. I'll wrap it up there. Oh, no, book recommendations. Okay, so because in researching this for today and looking stuff up, reminding myself of things, there's a few books that I've been dipping into, which I think you will really enjoy if you haven't already read them. House of Dudley, Dr. Joanne Paul. Looking specifically at the House of Dudley, you can watch an interview that I did with her on YouTube. Tudor, The Family Story from Leander Delisle. That is a very good book. Please do read that one. Blood, Fire and Gold by Estelle Perron, which I've mentioned a couple of times already. The Palace by Gareth Russell. Oh, by the way, there is an interview with Estelle on that book on my YouTube channel as well. The Palace with Gareth Russell, because it has that, particularly has the chapter covering Elizabeth and her smallpox episode at Hampton Court Palace. Again, there's an interview with Gareth on my YouTube, and you can catch all that on the podcast as well. And the other book I would recommend is The Sisters Who Would Be Queen by Leander Delisle. Lisa's recommending Sisters Who Would Be Queen as well. And the tidbit that I got out of there that I haven't actually shared is when I said that it was clear that Robert was having influence with the Queen, a brilliant example of just how much sway people thought he had with her is the story of Catherine Grey, a sister of Lady Jane Grey, who she secretly married the Earl of Hertford, and she fell pregnant very quickly. Apparently they were in bed for a very long time, didn't really leave. Anyway, so she fell pregnant, and at 8 months pregnant, she was desperate. She hadn't told Elizabeth that they got married. Clearly, therefore, Elizabeth's not going to know that she's pregnant. She is in the line of succession because she's in the legitimate line of Henry VIII's younger sister Mary. And so Catherine goes to Robert Dudley to ask him to intercede on her behalf and tell Elizabeth that she's married and she's pregnant. So, I mean, he's not successful in that. Catherine ends up in the Tower, Hertford ends up in the Tower, but she but clearly Catherine feels like he's her only hope to talk to the Queen about her situation. So that just indicates the kind of level of influence that people think she has, and that is from that story is from The Sisters Who Would Be Queen by Leander Delisle. So remember as well, so out of that book list you can hear Estelle, Joanne and Gareth speak at the Tudors Online History Festival. Okay, so the Tudors Online History Festival happened a little while ago now, but don't worry if you missed it, because you can get hold of all of the talks in a talk bundle at buymeacoffee.com/Philippa, that's PHILIPPA. Go to the shop tab and you can just get them all there. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for sticking with me for this very long one. That was fun. I hope you enjoyed that. Bye-bye.